Okay, Aladmas Kodesh Anoimdim. We're standing on holy terrain. We're here at the kever of the Avne Nezer, Rabbi Avrohom Bornsztain. We have Kvod Kedushas Maroin, Adoinenu Marin Rabbeinu, Hagoin HaKadosh Sara Torah, V'yiras Hashem Tahira Ma'orin Shal Yisrael. Our great master, the great Goin, the holy master of Torah, prince of Torah and fear of God, Rabbi Avrohom Bornsztain, Hagoin Avbezin the Kahal Kadosh Sachachav. The Avne Nezer was the Rebbe of Sachachav. Just to give you a little bit of a flavor, they say that the Avne Nezer had the neshama of the Maral of Prague. He was the son-in-law of the Kotzker, and the Munkacher writes about him in his introduction to the Darkei Tshuva. He says, Hagoin HaKadosh Sar HaTorah Kol Gufi Merases Me'eraisa Dilei. My body trembles from his Torah. Tilasoi Malaya Haaretz. His praise fills the world. Avne Nezer was born in 1838 in Bendin. Just to give you a little background as to his lineage, he writes in the Hakdama to Eglei Tal. So here, he's the Baal Mechaber Sefer Eglei Tal. He wrote the Eglei Tal. Eglei Tal is on Hilchos Shabbos, and the reason why he wrote on Hilchos Shabbos is because he says just like Shmiras Shabbos is the equivalent of all 613 mitzvahs, likewise learning Hilchos Shabbos is the equivalent of learning Kol HaTorah Kula. Well, he writes that he was a descendant of the Shach. Okay, that was his lineage. In the Avne Nezer, he wrote Shuvas Avne Nezer 7 Chalakim that was put together by his son, the Shemi Shmuel. He writes that he was a grandson, he was a descendant of the Ramah. So he comes from the Shach, comes from the Ramah. In Avne Nezer, Simon Reish Lamed Tes of Katan Hey, he says he was a grandson of the Masei Rekeach, who was a descendant of Rashi. Now his father, Ben Hagon Reb Zev Nachum. Reb Zev Nachum was the Baal Mechaber of the Agudas Ezov. And his father took him at 12 years old to the Kotzker Rebbe because his father was a student of the Kotzker Rebbe. And the Kotzker looks at the Avne Nezer. He sees what kind of son he has. He told his father, the reason you were Zoicha to have a child like this is in the merit that on every Purim you dedicate yourself the whole day to Limud HaTorah, and that merit you were Zoicha to have a son as the Avne Nezer. At 12 years old, the Agudas Ezov brings his son, the Avne Nezer, to visit the Kotzker Rebbe. That meeting ended with the Avne Nezer being engaged and being meshadech with the Kotzker Rebbe's daughter. Now, he marries Sarah Tzina. Actually, Tzina was a Sachat Shabanim. My grandmother, Alaa Shalom, her name was Tzina, Alaa Shalom. And they stayed in Kotsk for 7 years. The Shemi Shmuel, their only son, was born there in Kotsk. And in 1857, during that Tekufa that the Avne Nezer was in Kotsk, he slept 2 hours a night. The rest of the day, he was b'Torah v'avodah. Now, he writes that he already had Chidushei Torah from the age of 10 years old. But when he met the Kotzker Rebbe showed him what is really Chidushei Torah. After the Kotzker Rebbe died, he was looking to be a chassid. So first, the Avne Nezer became a chassid of his uncle, the Chidushei Harim. Then the Alexander Rebbe. In 1863, the Avne Nezer became a Rav for the first time in Partsav. 1867, because of the opposition that he had, he became an Avbezin in Krushnevitz. He made a yeshiva there. He had tremendous Talmidim. So just to mention some of the names of the Talmidim of the Avne Nezer. You have the Kli Chemda, Rav Meir Dan Palatsky. You have the Kinsker Rav, Rabbi Yoav Yehoshua Weingarten, the Chalkas Yoav. And he was very loyal to his Talmidim. He learned, he gave shir today. How much time does a Rosh Yeshiva give shir a day? The Avne Nezer taught his Talmidim 8 hours a day of shir. 8 hours daily, and he figured he'll leave publication till, much older, till his old age. Ultimately, we'll see at the end of his life, he wasn't able to teach his Talmidim anymore, so he felt that he has to be Marbitz Torah. He had a terrible cough, he had very weak lungs, and he wrote the Eglei Tal as a way of being Marbitz Torah when he wasn't able to give shir. 1870, Alexander Rebbe passes away. And now for the first time, the Avne Nezer is sort of being beckoned to become a Rebbe. Now, being a Rebbe is different than being a Maggid Shir. Being a Rebbe, you have to deal with people's issues, people's problems. He said, I'll become a Rebbe provided that my regular Seder of Shiurim continue, my learning schedule continue. You know, the Hasidim noticed that when the petitioners would come to the Avnei Nezer, he wouldn't really be spending time with them. Avnei Nezer says, that's right. Every second I interrupt from my learning, it's going to be harmful to the petitioner. They're better off only spending a few moments with me so I could continue my learning. In the biography of the Avnei Nezer, which is called the Avrohom, it's brought in the beginning of Chelek Beis, that the Avnei Nezer, at first he figured he'll be a Rebbe to like-minded people, to people who would appreciate his Torah. Now, somebody who appreciates Torah, what does he need from a Rebbe already? He needs, in case he gets drafted in the army. Says the Avnei Nezer, to get a chassid out of being drafted in the army, all I need to do is ask a kasha in the Gemara. If I'm metaretz the kasha, the person mystically is out of the army. But then, as we understand, a lot of simple people started coming to the Avnei Nezer, and they want parnasa. They want refuah. That's a different story. That's much harder to do it. That you can't just give them by asking and answering a kasha on the Gemara. 1876, he moves to Nasalesk, but he had a lot of opposition there, and ultimately, from 1883 to 1910, for 27 years, he's the Rebbe here in Sachachav, and the La'achar Misasai, his son, put together 7 volumes together with his grandson, Rav David Sachachavar, 7 volumes of the Avnei Nezer on Daled Chalkei Shulchan Aruch. I want to tell you 3 chidushim of the Avnei Nezer, 3 beautiful chidushim of the Avnei Nezer. Number 1. We know there's a halacha that l'chadchila one should try to eat the afikomen before chatzos. Rebbe Elazar ben Azariah says you have to eat the afikomen before chatzos. There's a famous go'oinus of the Avnei Nezer. It's called the Tanai of the Avnei Nezer, where the Avnei Nezer says like this. Rebbe Elazar ben Azariah says you have until chatzos. Rabbi Kiva says you have the whole night. The problem is if you're going to be makbid like Rebbe Elazar ben Azariah and eat the afikomen before chatzos, then you can't eat anything afterwards. And so what do? You know, the Seder is running late, so the Avnei Nezer has a chap. The chap of the Avnei Nezer is, if your Seder is running late, then what you do is quickly eat the afikomen before chatzos. So let's say, you know, you just ate matzah, and it's 5 minutes to chatzos. Eat another kazayas for afikomen. Then don't eat anything until chatzos. Says the Avnei Nezer Chidosh that according to Rebbe Elazar ben Azariah that the deadline for afikomen is chatzos. That means like this: you're only not allowed to eat afterwards until chatzos, but once chatzos comes, you're allowed to eat afterwards. And if the halacha is like Rabbi Akiva, so I'll eat the afikomen later again, and then I won't eat after that one. In other words, according to the Avnei Nezer, you eat 2 afikomens. Eat one before chatzos, don't eat after that until chatzos. And you say, if the halacha is like Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, I'll be yotze with the first afikomen. And if the halacha is like Rabbi Akiva, I'll be yotze with the second afikomen. That's the Tanai of the Avnei Nezer. Another famous thing that the Avnei Nezer writes in the Hakdama to the Eglei Tal is that the Zohar says, and this is something that young men are very frightened by, and it's something that causes a lot of despondency and depression, and that is for the Ched HaYadua, for the well-known sin, the sin of Haitzah Zara Levatala, the Zohar says, wasting seed, you can't do tshuva. Says the Heilige Avnei Nezer, when the Zohar says you can't do tshuva, that means you can't do regular tshuva. But the seed, the zera, emanates al pi Kabbalah and scientifically from the brain. Al pi Kabbalah comes from the moyach, and scientifically it's triggered by the pituitary gland. That being the case, you could do tshuva by learning Torah in depth. If you learn Torah in depth with your mind, that cleanses you even from any sin. All sins are cleansed through limud Torah b'iyun. And the third chidush, and this is one of the most well-known chidush in the Avnei Nezer, and so important, is that people think, mistakenly, that the highest level of Torah is like if you mutsha yourself, if you, I'm dead tired and I really don't enjoy the learning and it's really not interesting, but I'm going to force myself. But if I enjoy learning, That's like Shaloi Lashma. No, says Avne Nezer. The highest madrega of learning is where you learn and you enjoy it. The more hana you get out of your learning, the more it's coursing through your veins, the more it's part of your personality. That's Torah Lashma. And that's the legacy of the Torah of the Avne Nezer. Torah with enjoyment, with hana, with simcha, and may the zchus of the Avne Nezer protect all of us and all of Klal Yisrael. Abi Yaskel Tzedek.